All right, we will go ahead and get started with some introductions before we get to our main presentation for the evening. My name is Sophia Zanowski. I am the Registrar and Director of Development at St. Bernard School of Theology and Ministry. We are a graduate theological school located in upstate New York. We have physical campuses in the cities of Rochester and Albany, but we also serve students from across the country and the world really through our distance education programs. We have master's degrees in theology and philosophy primarily, but then we also have graduate certificates where anyone who maybe doesn't have a bachelor's degree or is not quite seeking an entire master's degree can engage in our classes and take a cluster of them on a niche topic towards a graduate certificate. One of those graduate certificates is a certificate in Catholicism and the Fine Arts. So I like to mention it at this series because usually the people who are interested in this Words with Wine series might be interested in the classes that are part of that certificate. We also put on a number of events and initiatives. We have an upcoming event next Wednesday that is located out of our Albany campus, but can also be accessed digitally via Zoom from anywhere. It's one of our theology and culture events, which is another series we run, which is about contemporary topics and their intersection with the faith. And so we have one of our diocesan priests out in Albany, Father Sam, will be talking about a Eucharistic mysticism. So we hope to see some of you there as well. I will be sending out a follow-up email probably tomorrow with some of this information. So I'll also include the link to register for this event in case anyone is interested. Now, we've been putting on this Words with Wine series for over a year and a half now. We started it back at the height of the pandemic to bring people together in a digital space to talk about the fine arts, the classics, and their intersection with faith. Over a side of wine. And so we decided to partner with New Clairvaux Vineyard to literally bring people together coast to coast. We're in New York and they're in Vina, California. They are a vineyard that is run by a winemaking family in collaboration with a community, a monastic community. And they make some really, really wonderful wines. So we've been really thankful to partner with them to put on this series and to bring together some really wonderful speakers, some wonderful artists on all kinds of topics. We've talked about literature, poetry, music, architecture, and of course tonight we will hear about some sacred art. So without further ado, let me just pull up Gwyneth's bio here. I will go ahead and introduce Gwyneth. So sorry, my slide is stuck. Oh, there we go. Okay, so Gwyneth Thompson-Briggs joins us. She is a sacred artist and a painter in the perennial tradition of Western sacred art. Her work decorates churches, schools, and homes throughout the Americas and Europe. In 2019, she founded the Catholic Artists Directory, which you can find online, catholicartistsdirectory.com, which seeks to connect patrons and artists for a new renaissance of beauty. And so I will go ahead and turn it over to Gwyneth to share with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Is everything working on that end? Great. I'm really excited to speak with you all today because I've really just been sort of working full time as a sacred artist for about 3 years now. And with every commission that I get, it's like this brand new challenge where, you know, I learn from each one, but I also want to keep taking risks. And each time that the level of difficulty increases, there's another chance to either take a risk or do something safe. And sometimes when you take a risk, you look kind of stupid. So I want to share with you some of the risk taking that I'm working on right now. And so I'm going to try to share my screen with you and go through some of my, begin by talking about some of my most recent projects. Let's see. Is everybody seeing the shared screen okay? Great. So what I've noticed most as a sacred artist recently is that as soon as you start to add more than one figure or context within a space, things get really difficult really fast. These are a few examples of paintings I've done within the last year. On the left is St. Lawrence. He's the patron saint of cooks. And you can see he's on fire. That was the form of his martyrdom. And then on the right is St. Peter Damian, and he's kind of wielding a flagellum and holding a millstone, kind of offering the viewer the choice between doing penance in this life or experiencing punishment in the next. So for both of these, I just really loved focusing on the vestments and the play of light and getting all of that detail in there. But you can see that the background is just sort of this simplified, ambiguous space. I think that works for these kind of intimate, spiritual portraits, especially since they're more or less life-size. So that's kind of a smaller scale. Maybe the one on the right's about 32 inches across and 40 inches tall, and the one on the left is a little bit larger. After those projects, I was asked to do a Tondo of Saint Joseph with the Christ Child, and this piece is designed to be viewed from quite far away under very low lighting conditions. So you can see that the finish is a little bit more rough and that the effect is more of a mural. The space here is a slightly less ambiguous. There's tools hanging in the background, but still there's just sort of this, strange world that they're occupying. Here's one that just finished drawing. This is Christ in the home of Mary and Martha. And this piece was really a challenge because suddenly there's multiple figures. I decided to try having the scene backlit. And so I set up in my studio sort of a still life, and I had lots of models come in different costumes. And, smaller pieces would work, but then I'd realize, oh, you know what? I think I made that head too small, or, the table wasn't the correct depth. Anyway, there were so many challenges that I thought, oh my goodness, maybe I should just stick to what I know I can do successfully. But then I received a larger commission, and this is my task right now, to design a set of very large paintings. These are 5 feet tall, 9 feet across, and they're going into a very large church where they'll be viewed both from a distance as well as up close. The space is somewhat contemporary, and the theme for one is St. Charles Borromeo, and the other is of Our Lady. So I always begin by doing a lot of research, try not to have many preconceived notions about what something is going to look like in the end. And I began by learning about St. Charles Borromeo, and I found an image of a cope that he wore and portraits that show his very distinctive nose. And I was looking at images of cardinals who wore capa magna, which is a distinct cardinalatial dress on formal occasions. And then the orientation of the 5 feet tall by 9 feet wide, sort of an awkward space. And to sort of cope with that, I thought, one convention that has been used is these curtains that just kind of hang across the picture plane in various works of art. So you see, Rembrandt has tried this device in Vermeer. So I was kind of playing with that. And then I also really love the landscapes of Bellini, and the smaller image that you can see towards the top of the page here is an image of Our Lady taken from the doors of the Cathedral of Milan. And Milan is where St. Charles Borromeo's seat was. So I thought that might be an appropriate pose. It's hard to see because it's so tiny, but basically the Christ child is pulling at her veil. And if you've ever sat through Mass holding a toddler with a veil on, you know exactly what that feels like. I've taken to wearing hats during Mass. So the starting place for any of these compositions is usually a thumbnail sketch. And here's a wonderful example of what Rembrandt did when he started with here's a thumbnail sketch of the concept of the prodigal son. And then we can compare this with the painting, this famous painting of the prodigal son. It's my suspicion that for the most part, thumbnail sketches are almost always worked from imagination. So this is without models or anything like that. You're just doing a quick sketch and saying, where do I want my big regions of light and my dark, and where is the figure going to go? I'll worry about the details later. Now, I'm going to pause here just for a moment in the talk to apologize for the fact that I don't have full citations and sources for every image. If there are any that you would like more information about, please let me know. I'm very happy to get that information to you after the fact. But anyways, my apologies. So here are my thumbnail sketches for these two paintings. So on the left, you can see Charles Borromeo sort of leaning on a prie-dieu at prayer. And I liked the idea of curtains where you could just sort of glimpse sort of a heavenly landscape beyond him. And then for Our Lady, I have angels kneeling in adoration, sort of partially veiled by more curtains. And this is kind of the starting point. So after the thumbnail sketch, the next step is really the color study. This is a great example of a color study by John Singer Sargent. This is for just a portion of his murals in the Boston Public Library. It's called, I think it's called The Allegory of Religion. And on the left here in this sketch, you can see, you know, it's a little bit messy, but basically all the information is here, highlighting this figure with the pale blues against these wonderful golds, and then that sort of russet red color. Compare that to the finished mural, and you can see that that big concept of color distribution is still there. So, you know, as long as you can like keep that in your head, that small strategy that's sketched out ahead of time, then it will translate into that final painting. I tried to do this just with watercolor, and again, this is primarily just from imagination, very small scale, very rough. But the strategy here was to choose the color of curtains that would not detract from the red of the cardinalatial habit of the robes, or the red of Mary's gown either. So this is my idea. After I presented it to the architect and to the church, they said, well, these paintings really need to be on opposite sides. So I took mirror images of them. And then after looking at the marble that was going to be used in the space, I thought, you know, that green is all wrong. So I switched to sort of a terracotta damask. The idea of this like heavenly landscape in the background made me think about, okay, how can I paint heaven? And unfortunately, I don't live in Tuscany, so I can't just walk out the front door and paint Tuscany. But I do live in St. Louis. It's not Tuscany, but there are some beautiful places. Here's an example of just a study by Da Vinci, and you can see this this sort of wondrous magical outline of these mountains that show up in the background of so many of his paintings. You know, even the Mona Lisa, we tend to get drawn into her face, but if you could tear yourself away from her eyes, really try to look at the landscapes in the background. So here I am sketching at the St. Louis Art Museum. This is Forest Park in St. Louis, and you can see the art museum off in the distance. And there's nothing like actually doing plein air sketching in person, because the light keeps changing and you're just chasing these moments of beauty that come one after the other, that you can just never obtain from purely going from a photographic sketch or a photographic source. So I guess that's something that I want to come back to, and I'd love to have a conversation with the attendees about after we get through the process here, because this is a tension that is in the life, I think, of every single artist. We have so many technological resources. Which do we use and which do we say, no, let's do it the hard way, you know? But here's the painting. You can see this is sort of the background of the finished painting, where I've tried to weave in, you can see some of the trees in the background of where I was doing my study. Those same sorts of trees are kind of showing up in the painting here. Also, I decided to include this just tiny like flock of birds flying around. All of this is very tiny. It's just in the distant landscape of the final painting. In order to get the figures and the drapery, I decided to try to do everything the hard way. This is probably the most beautiful and most famous example of a figure drawing and then its translation into a final fresco. The thing that I want to emphasize here, that I think is true for anyone that's attempted to do this, is that, you know, when you're sketching and drawing, the model is moving a tiny bit and weaving a little bit. The light maybe is inconsistent, but you're adjusting your drawing as you're going. You're trying to figure out where that thumb needs to be, what's the most beautiful angle that can be found in that gesture. Then once you have that drawing, you've gotten everything worked out, then it's a matter of saying, okay, how do I change this from being a bunch of detailed parts, you know, not it shouldn't be like a nose that's next to an eye that's next to an ear. Instead, we have this just marvelous unity in this final figure. Notice how in the Libyan Sibyl here, the garments, the shadow line on the back picks up with the shadow line on the drapery here. So suddenly these aren't just like clothes that are completely separate and superimposed on this figure. This is one cohesive, strong sculptural element. So these are the figure studies that I did for each of the paintings for the central figures. And I always try to either make or find costumes for every figure in my paintings. And I was very fortunate to have a connection with a parish that just happened to have a Kappa Magna, a bishop's Kappa Magna. So I borrowed that. I tried sewing the little zucchetto. I can't sew, and it did not go well. It would look like a coaster. So I have a coaster out of watered, like faux watered silk, but I had to use my imagination for that part. And then for the figure of Mary, I wanted to think of her sort of as Queen of Heaven in sort of a imaginary Renaissance costume. So I cut up a sort of an ugly 90s sport coat, and in every cut, I just pulled out the underdress to give her slashed sleeves and all sorts of things like that. Here's an example in the studio. It was about 97 degrees the day that I was doing the color study. And I gave my model lots of breaks to get a drink of water. But yeah, it's pretty intense to be wearing all of these robes. The effect that natural light has on silk, though, is just amazing. I was really challenged, especially to be doing a portrait of a saint who we kind of know what they look like, but I don't have a model that looks just like Charles Borromeo. So what I did was I looked to my model to see the shadow patterns, and I can see where the light is hitting, what the transitional tones might be. But then I also looked at extant paintings of Charles Borromeo and tried to get a sense a little bit more of his personality. So that sort of mouth where the corners are a bit sunken, and the very pronounced nose. I guess it's a little bit more sloped here, but I took lots of artistic liberties. The drapes, which I felt like are just so important for making both paintings match, since they're showing up in both. I ended up ordering some silk that had belonged to French bed curtains, and they're just falling apart. They can't be used for fabric at all. But even though they're in this extreme state of decay, they're perfect for painting. And this reminds me that with the painting, you can preserve objects in a way like no other. So when I'm trying to convince people to lend me things, I say, well, this is a way to preserve it as well. And I promise I won't get paint on it. These are composite sketches where, after I did studies of all the individual drapes and the individual figures and sort of the landscapes, I overlaid all the drawings together to try to give some sense, okay, this is what I'm thinking. Do you want any changes at this point before I start putting paint everywhere? The only couple of changes that were requested was, first of all, they wanted Charles Borromeo to be holding a cross. And then they thought Our Lady maybe looked a little 1940s or something. They wanted a heavier veil. But fortunately, I already had a veil on the way from India. I had found some beautiful like peacock colored silk. So I'll show you that in just a moment. Once the whole final drawing is worked out, the next step is to get it onto the canvas. And you can do that a few different ways. Historically, one way to do it, if you are working with frescoes, is you would prick little holes into the cartoon and then pounce charcoal powder through the holes. It would show up on the wet plaster, and then you could just go ahead and paint. If you wanted to work really fast, you could just put the cartoon on the wet plaster and then with a knife cut through it. But both with pouncing and with cutting through the cartoon, you sort of destroy the drawing as well. So if you want to preserve the drawing, or if you want to scale the drawing, creating a grid over the surface is an excellent way to do this. So you'd put a grid over your drawing, a grid over the canvas, and then you just look back and forth and you say, every time you see a square, like for example, this square right here, there's a little, the corner of the head you say, okay, I'll draw that corner over here. And then as the painting develops, there might still be some additional modifications. I think that we can see a big difference between the face on the far left, between the drawing and the painting, but really the larger sense of the whole drawing is there. And you can see too, a lot more time was spent on the nuances of drapery around Our Lady's ankles here. Really, really extraordinary. So I use that same approach. I'm fortunate to have some young people helping out, and that in itself is gives me just the smallest glimpse into what a Renaissance workshop might have been like. And suddenly I'm very interested to know, how did that work with all the assistants, and was there a pecking order? I mean, I'm always asking all of my assistants to just keep gessoing, and they're tired of gessoing, but I need them to gesso, so I need to figure out how to strike that balance. Here's the canvas with the whole grid on it, and you can see I'm holding I just printed off my composite drawing, and that's about the size that I look at when I very loosely transfer the whole drawing up. So here you can see there's the charcoal lines, and then I just jump in and start very loosely putting paint on. I find that it takes me about 3 skins of paint, 3 layers of paint, before it really starts to feel opaque and has just a good surface to work with. So even if I'm not sure if something is exactly how I want it, it's very low risk because you can always paint over it, you can scrub it out, what have you. For the drapes, I had the drapes in person, but I wasn't quite working out, and then I thought, I'm going to try something different. I took a few photos of the brocade pattern of the drapes, and then I printed them off. I blew them up to be life size. Then I took a piece of acetate and I just covered it over and cut out the patterns with an X-Acto knife. And this does not work very well. I tried to have one of my assistants do it, and then he was bleeding, and I was like, no, don't do that. I'll do it. But then I realized it's hard to do, so you can't get the exact design, but I got close enough to be able to just generally apply the sparkle of the pattern on top of the 3-dimensional concept of the curtain itself. So yeah, hopefully that kind of makes sense. And then I went back in because I decided, well, instead of just a floral pattern, wouldn't it be beautiful to have the rosary woven in with the roses here? And I just think it's perfect timing that I get to speak with you on the feast of Our Lady of the Rosary. But yeah, I thought Charles Borromeo might approve of my new curtain pattern here. So here you can see this is what the finished, well, almost finished. I want to keep working on the drapery down here, just like Pontormo down by the ankles. But you can see how all of these different elements have come together. So I had a prie-dieu to work from life. Here you can see all of the drapery studies and the portrait, and I had a crucifix that I was working from. The landscape is very much imaginative, but it's taken from experiences of doing plein air painting, and then there's the curtain as well. So that's the Charles Borromeo painting, and it's mostly done. I'd say 95%, unless I like suddenly paint it all out and start over again. But the matching painting is what I'm in the thick of right now. I've been painting it for maybe maybe a week now. So you'll see how far I've gotten, and you can give me suggestions on how to improve it from here. So this is the sketch on the canvas, and really I've just drawn in the whole thing with charcoal and then went over it with a bit of thinned out paint. You can see here's my model with my costume I spent about an hour on, and she's just holding a baby doll until I get a real baby in there for a quick photo shoot. And I'm just so undecided. I keep changing angles, all sorts of things. But you can see that the painting has changed quite a bit. So this is how it stands right now this afternoon as I left it. You can see that the color of the veil here, as they wanted a little bit heavier veil, it's like an iridescent blue, and the deeper shadows have a bit of green in them. So it's kind of an exciting blue. My plan is to continue the drapes on either side of the figure to match that of Charles Borromeu's, and then to also develop the deep background in a similar manner, but maybe with a bit more visual interest. I'd like to develop the throne that she's sitting on, and just today I went out to the dumpster behind my house, and someone had thrown away a terribly ugly coffee table made in China, made of like plastic, but one of the legs had just a beautiful pattern on it. So I just ripped the leg off of the coffee table, and I've gessoed it so it's drying, and it will just serve as this beautiful model that when the light hits it, I can model that and sort of place all of that engraving, that carving onto her throne. So really, this is so much fun. I think that this has to be the nicest job in the world. And if any of you are artists or aspiring artists, I'd really like to hear about your process as well and see how it differs. I feel like I have a lot in common with novelists who, everything is research. They say, I'm doing research for my book. I feel the same way. And every time I meet a new person, I'm secretly thinking, who would they be a good model for? So I'd like to open it up for some questions. And yeah, so any questions right off?
I have a question. How long does it usually take for you to finish a painting? Does it really depend on how complex it is? But like on average, what would you say?
Right now, I spend 1 month on each painting. And so yeah, it usually is a full month of like physical painting, but then there's a couple of weeks of research and design. And then after the painting is painted, then it needs to dry for, at least a month or so. And then if it needs to be framed or shipped, things like that, that can take a while. So right now I have a bit of a waiting period for people that commission works, but in general, if I'm saying, okay, thank you for commissioning, this picture today, you should have it in 3 months, something like that. Yeah.
Nancy, it looks like you have oh, there you go.
Yes, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to tell you what I thought I saw when I looked at your painting of Mary. The things you broke off from the Chinese table that you've turned into her throne.
Oh, I haven't done that yet. Yeah.
Oh, well, whatever you have as her throne now or behind her, looked to me like a Torah scroll, the Jewish Torah, how it unravels. Yes. And you have the two ends. And I'm sitting here thinking, this is really cool because Mary was really Jewish. And so this looks, and then, so it's funny what people see when they look at something, but I thought it was great.
Well,
I thought it was.
it's so interesting that you noticed that. I mean, that wasn't, I mean, my concept was I was thinking about maybe having 2 hearts on either corner of the
Yeah.
throne,
Yeah.
like this, the Immaculate Heart and the Sacred Heart.
Mhm.
But a couple of years ago, I was asked to design a crown for a statue of Mary. And I thought, oh, it'd be really neat to do a Holy Ghost crown, like in the Portuguese tradition, where there's a dove in the center of the crown representing the Holy Ghost. And I went to a silversmith, and he had all these random pieces that we got to put together, including a little dove. And I thought, where did this dove come from? It was from the end of a Torah scroll. And so just as you noted, you know, the symbolism is just absolutely perfect. So yeah, so any other questions?
Like on that, this kind of topic of symbolism, you know, everything can mean something else. Like colors can be metaphorical. The little, like the pomegranate seeds you included on the table, one thing that could be a metaphor for something. Is that something you intentionally try to do? Or is it more like people create their own meaning, like Nancy just did, of what she saw, and you know, we never know what Gwyneth meant the pomegranate seeds to mean, but now we're interpreting it, you know, one way or another. Or do you do it intentionally?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, I do include a lot intentionally. I usually try to read up on the tradition and to realize that I'm part of a visual language that already exists. And so I do like to make use of, especially, I guess, visual images or symbols that have maybe been used in a different context or have been forgotten. It's really wonderful to bring that back. But you know, every time there's always something else that I didn't intend that just shows up. And one example is that I did a painting of Saint Joseph where he's holding a staff that's blossoming and the lily is blossoming. And I had given this to an order of nuns, and they put it like in their newsletter and sent it around. And someone read it and they said, my deaf brother noticed that the lilies were in the form of a hand indicating I love you. And I looked back at the painting and I was like, oh my goodness, yes, it looks like it's exactly the same shape, but that was entirely providential. Yeah.
It looks like we might have a virtual hand raised.
Okay.
I don't know if that, yeah.
Hi, it was me. So first of all, I'm not a native English speaker, so I apologize. So I would like to ask you about more about your motivation. How did you come to decide to start painting full time? It's a hard job in some countries. Here, I don't think, here in Guatemala, I live in Guatemala, Central America. There's no way you can afford your life with painting. So that's why I want to know this, because I've been following your works for, say, some months now, and I really love it, and especially because it's about religious stuff. I want to show you this. This is how I do.
Oh, very good.
I cannot go any further. It's just too difficult for me. So I just want to know what was your motivation, because it is great to hear you and your passion about talking about how you the process of painting. So please tell me more about it.
Yes, well, you know, every day I wake up and I say, how is it that I get to do this for my job? I can't believe it. But really, it did not come easily. I always loved art, but I didn't quite trust that I could even pay rent being an artist. So when I was a young person, I studied engineering, and I ended up doing my undergraduate in engineering physics. I got a master's degree in engineering systems, and I hated it. That was not my vocation. But in the process, I had to learn a lot of math. And so I realized I really liked teaching math. And I taught math at night as I got more and more art training. And eventually I saved up and I went to art school. And after I finished art school, I realized I don't know how to paint because it's a contemporary art school. And so we just sat around talking about postmodernism. So when I was 30, I had saved up again and paid off those student loans. And I say, okay, I found an artist. There's a wonderful artist out in Boston named Paul Ingebrigtsen. And I studied with him for a couple of years. Finally, I learned how to paint. But I also met my husband, and we had our first child. And I was like, I'm too busy. I can maybe paint for 1 hour a week. So long story short, it wasn't until a few years ago when basically it looked like my husband was going to lose his job. And we thought, how do we, what do we do? And I thought, maybe art, I don't know, but maybe that's not responsible. So I called up a bunch of professional sacred artists and I said, I'm thinking about maybe jumping into this. We'd like to provide for our family. We have 3 children now. And they said, don't do it. Bad idea, no. But God kind of just kicked us in the pants and said, well, you know, there's no other choices at this point. So what we did strategically was we moved to a very affordable region of the country, the Midwest. And we tried to eat lots of rice and beans at first. And we just had a couple of small commissions, but apparently it was what we were called to do because God has provided. And we just said, this is an experiment for a few weeks, for a few months. And then a few months has now turned into a few years. And I'm astonished that there is such a demand out there. There need to be more artists, and we need to train young people, and we need to make opportunities for people like yourself. But right now, the fact of the matter is it's very difficult to find training. And even if you do find training, some of the most excellent schools in the country don't teach you how to make large scale compositions. You know, you can learn how to do a portrait, but to create something that pairs something imaginative with observed realism is very hard to teach, very hard to learn, very hard to do. So, yeah.
Can I add just one more thing? I'm an engineer too. I'm a mechatronics engineer, and right at this point, I'm trying to find like my passion, and still I haven't found it. So that's why I asked you.
Yes, well, I would recommend seeing if there are any artists that you can find in person. I think it's very, very important to study in person and see if you can just meet with them or work with them or volunteer your time. Any place where you can study, I think, you know, God works with us just taking whatever small step is available within our immediate realm. You know, and then more opportunities that require maybe larger leaps of faith present themselves. But, you know, just try to take the steps that you can right now. Yeah, any other questions or
A real hand.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, my name is Larry Feingold. And
how are you doing?
Gwyneth. Very well. So we live in St. Louis, in the same city with Gwyneth. And we had the privilege a couple of years ago of seeing your studio. And it's so beautiful to see how you've been developing. And thank you. I just want to say thank you so much for walking us through the process, right? Because so often you go to an art museum, you see the finished work, right? And it's really hard to get a sense of the steps. And so that was just so illuminating and satisfying to have you walk us through the way you went. And so I used to do sculpture quite a while ago, and I was faced with the same problem. How do you start, right? How do you find, and again, so it was so important finding an artist that I could be in the studio with and watch and observe. And I really appreciate what you said about the research, right? And doing a work. And that's what's so, I mean, the great Renaissance works and Baroque works, and there's a ton of thought, right, that goes into them. Leonardo and Rembrandt. And so it's, again, it's so inspiring hearing you speak about the research and the thinking and the wrestling with the ideas and the looking for, and so I kept thinking of Rembrandt, because he needed things to paint for his props. And so he finally went bankrupt because he bought so many props.
Yes,
right?
I could see that. Yeah. Well, yeah, and you know, that just I think every time I try a new painting, I realize my own like limitations and inadequacy, and you know, it makes you appreciate the works of the past that much more every time. And right now, I really want to study more about perspective, and it's really difficult finding a resource to figure out how do you work out the perspective on like a curved wall, projecting it in a convincing space. So anyway, there's just, you know, the development out there is endless, but I think, you know, for anyone, no matter where you're starting as an artist, you know, you start with one problem at a time, and that's what makes it so much fun, is that first you're like, how do I convey an apple correctly with light and shadow, and then it's a bunch of apples, and then it's a face, you know. But yeah, we don't really know that much about the process for individual artists, because I think too there's a level of secrecy. And I've certainly met artists that say, I don't talk about my process, I don't talk about my technique. And I'm just of a completely different mind. I think that future generations, you know, need all the help they can get. You know, I've really struggled to find, I've really tried to seek out artists who can be mentors. And that's one of the reasons why my husband and I put together the Directory of Sacred, the Catholic Artists Directory, which is not comprehensive. There's a lot of people I invited where I think artists aren't great at answering email, but there's tons of artists out there. This is just a few of living artists today that I think young people would do very well to pay attention to their work and maybe even reach out to as well. Thanks so much for joining us today. So yeah. So yeah, any other questions? And then if there aren't questions, then I have a discussion question for you guys. So yeah.
I just had a comment, just actually piggybacking off of Lawrence's comment of just seeing your process. To me, it just struck me how the way that you perceive the world must be just so so unique. And I'm sure that is reflective of every artist, but I just can only imagine what it looks like, just the way that you're researching light and how someone holds themselves. And I just wonder what it's like as an artist to just walk through life with that sort of worldview. It just seems so beautiful.
Well, you know, I'll tell you what, I'm very bad about details. Like for me, everything is about like the big picture and the big composition, the big light effect. But that means that I don't get to the corners when I clean. And so, yeah, my husband's very detail oriented. So anything with the business where, you know, especially if it's anything written, everything is rife with typos. It's just kind of a disaster, but the layout looks nice. So I think looking at the world with very fuzzy eyes there is the closest analogy I can get to. So the topic that I really would love to speak with all of you about, that's very near to my heart, because I think that, you know, we're meeting via Zoom. So we're meeting over this screen. So really, I'm not seeing you, I'm seeing an image of you. And you're not really seeing my paintings, you're seeing images of the paintings. So there's this question of this like digital barrier, and seeing a painting in real life, I think is an irreplaceable experience. You know, it has this aura that cannot exist via digital means. But what I'm seeing a lot in the realm of traditional arts are artists that rely on purely photographic sources, and they're not experiencing the physical world with their physical body. And when you use resources like Photoshop or things like that, or when all of the images that you see have been sort of processed to a certain extent, it's almost like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, you don't want to settle for the mundane, for the real world, for glimpsing a much more subtle sense of beauty within like a play of light. As a viewer, I don't know, do you care about the process very much, or is it really just the finished image? Does it matter if the artist has been working from a collage or from photo reference, or I don't know, is it important to work from life? I mean, I feel like because I'm an artist, I can often look at a painting and I know how they got to that final step. But I don't know, is that important? What do you think, Larry?
I would like to answer.
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Don't worry, go ahead.
So I was just saying, yes, I think it matters a great deal, because we do see it, even if we can't put our finger on it. And so I couldn't agree with you more that I think photography poses a big danger for painters and sculptors to rely on it too much. And so I think part of the success,
computer generated,
yeah, and likewise computer generated images, et cetera. And so I think part of the success of this dreamlike quality of your paintings and is from the fact that you haven't worked from a photograph, and that even if I can't necessarily, demonstrate just as a viewer say exactly why I think that, I think very much that's coming through. Because there's, again, it's that contact with life that isn't totally graspable, whereas the photographic outline, it's the photo, right? The camera has grasped it, and
but as she said, the light is always changing. Things are always changing when you're out, when you're doing it from life. So you're not, it's not static, it's not flat.
right. And so I think this comes across both with the figures and with your landscape. So I love that landscape in the Borromeo painting. Yeah, big, because there's something that's both from life and has this dreamlike quality at the same time.
Yeah, I always think about it a lot within the context of like the soul, and especially as a portrait artist, we all have like photos. Sometimes there's a photo of us and we say, oh, or a photo of a person, you say, that doesn't really look like them. They don't look like that. It's just a bad photo. But when you're painting the portrait of a person over time, you're sort of watching which mannerisms they fall into over and over, and exactly how their coloring is. Like maybe the blood collects more in the tips of their ears or their nose on a cold day or something like that. And yeah, to just distill a person to this like moment, it seems wrong. That because we exist in time, like a painting should be painted in time. Yeah,
so I teach an aesthetics class, and so one of the things that, at least that I talk about a lot, is that in painting and sculpture, in the visual arts, you're trying to get at the essence somehow of, right? All right, it's a particular person perhaps, but I still want to get the essence of that person. Whereas it seems that photography, just by its nature, is capturing the accident. And so it seems that the goal of the artist is to go somehow beyond that.
Yeah, I think you hit on the exact thing, the essence, because I find when I study the works of the past, I'm always amazed at how unified a particular painting is. There isn't a bunch of excess visual detritus where, if I was painting your portrait right now, it would take me a long time to get all of the photos on your refrigerator. Might be a little bit distracting. But really, that's if you're this slave to the photograph that you're working from. If you're really, trying to communicate a portrait of Dr. Feingold, then, you'd say, well, maybe all of those elements are not important. Same thing too, if you're having like a bad hair day, you say, well, we'll just kind of smooth that out to get more at the essence of Dr. Feingold. So
this is a question on that, so not an answer to your original question, but when you are studying and painting people you will never meet, such as St. Charles Borromeo, how do you go about learning their essence in order to capture it?
yes, this is a great question, because one of the really serious problems that we have right now is that so many of the newer saints that have more recently been canonized, we have photos of them, so we know what they look like. But if you're trying to do a painting based on this like grainy black and white photo, it's a recipe for disaster. And I don't know if you've ever done a Google image search for a painting of like Padre Pio or something, but there are literally thousands of horrible paintings of Padre Pio based on like 2 photographs. And so you're like, how do you solve this problem? And I've made several attempts in the past. I don't think terribly successfully, but I've tried to use some photo references and then also posing models to kind of be in the same gesture, so I can at least see how flesh would be modeled under similar lighting conditions. But it doesn't work, and I haven't been able to solve it. Some artists I think are better at that than I am. I feel like my brain is like splitting in 2 when I try to use these dual influences. But I think that the best way to really get at the essence of the spiritual portrait is to really read about what all of their virtues and personality was from their biographies, and then find a model that seems to just kind of spontaneously communicate either a great sense of purity or a great sense of joy or a sense of valor. And the philosopher Dietrich von Hildebrand wrote this wonderful 2-volume set on aesthetics, and he talks about how various virtues seem to sort of like ingrain themselves on the human face. When you live a life of particular virtue, in some way, like it almost does become a part of your physical appearance. And I think we can all kind of attest to that from personal experience. But I think that some of the most beautiful paintings I've seen of Saint Therese of Lisieux didn't look exactly like any of her photos, but they conveyed her heart in a way that was so much more convincing than a distractingly bad photo reference painting could not do. So I don't know, those are my thoughts. But I have walked away from a lot of commissions where people said, can you just turn this photo into a painting? I just said, I can't. It's not going to work out. It's not going to look good. Trust me. Yeah, I think there's another hand.
Yes. I just wanted to complement the last question you made. And the thing is that I guess you really can't ask someone to appreciate the exact process you had to face to make a painting. But what you can ask is to appreciate the experience. Me as a hobbyist, I would say, an artist, I've come to appreciate more of this process because I have been involved in it. Things like trying to capture the expression of a person, it's not something that's easy. It is very hard. And that's the sort of things that people can appreciate. It is not the same as a digital medium. I don't know if you have heard of it, but there's right now the possibility of purchasing digital stuff. You can purchase a property, a digital property, and it's not the same. It's not the same. In this sense, a painting is far superior than any digital media and even a photograph. But honestly, I don't think someone can appreciate the exact process. But if someone comes to appreciate art and get involved in some sort of visual arts, then those kind of persons, they can appreciate some aspects of this process, and that's why I've come to realize.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, it's the world that we live in is so disorienting that I think it's a very gradual process that we come to appreciate true beauty, because we're sort of lied to as far as, what we want and what beauty is. And it's only by sort of groping in the right direction that gradually things dawn on us that you say, well, you know what, maybe it's better to just have, one, one beautiful plate instead of a whole stack of styrofoam plates, and to start to like eliminate and just focus on the beauty and quality of smaller and more beautiful materials. I think that right now we're just, there's so much stuff that just enter our home, from China. And I find, having small children, suddenly you're surrounded by toys and clothes, and you're not quite sure how it happened, but it's really a matter of getting rid of things instead of acquiring more things. So it's counterintuitive, but that's what's so exciting about not just being an artist, but just being alive, is you start to understand a more profound concept of beauty. And then also, I would say too, a lot of young people that I meet, they don't know a lot about art history, and they say, where do I start? And I think, if you want to learn how to cultivate taste, and that's something that I think is a particular challenge for us, not only living today, but also living so far away from a lot of the treasures that I think if you're living in Europe, might be tempted to take them for granted. I would just say, start with an artist that you're attracted to. Look at their work, learn about them. That will lead you to other artists, other works. And, before you know it, suddenly your breadth of experience has widened, and you become a much more discriminating viewer and much more appreciative of the work that does go into crafting a work of art. So that's something that I'd really encourage everyone attending today. You obviously have a spontaneous love and interest in art, but to create a high standard for yourself, and keep that bar really high when you evaluate new artists, and keep it high for yourself too. It's really discouraging when you're trying to make art, because it's so hard. And if you have an inner critic that's a little too loud, sometimes it stops you from creating any work of art. But if you just focus on the virtues of patience, of humility, you can grow in both the spiritual life and in artistic skill, I think, at the same time. Any other?
I'd just like to comment. So when I went to your studio, and we can see in the background, I really appreciated that you spent so much time painting the old masters. So I think behind you, and can you show us what?
Yeah. Yeah, so I've got a couple of examples from the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. So there's the El Greco, and then there's also a Ribera. In the middle here, it's kind of hard to see with the glare, but maybe I can just bring it over and share it with you. This is a more recent painting. This is a saint, Saint Pedro Calungsod, and he's a Filipino saint. He's one of only 2 Filipino saints, but he lived, during basically the Spanish Brogue period and in the Philippines. And I thought, well, it's kind of appropriate to depict him using a similar technique. But this is a situation where there is no photographic reference. So I was trying to work with a model that was kind of conveying his heroism when he was martyred. And he's holding the instrument of his martyrdom. This is a Filipino spear. He was an assistant to Spanish Jesuit missionaries who had just baptized a baby girl at her mother's request. And the father found out and wasn't happy and speared both the priest and Pedro Calungsod. But he's also holding the catechism that they would have used at the time. And he's wearing, it's called a barong Tagalog, which is the traditional formal wear for Filipino men. And historically, he probably would not have worn it, but I thought it's almost a way of placing him in, I don't know, almost like liturgical vestments or something. And I've used the embroidery that is in the ceremonial shirt, kind of echoed it in the halo around his head. So it's very much informed by the studies done. And so I try to do a lot of old master studies regularly because I feel like the old masters are my teachers. And so each time I do a copy, not only is it a reminder of how far I have to go, but each time I just see a little something else. Oh, that's how they did that. And so, no matter how long you paint, I think you're always learning. There's a much better picture of that painting on my website if you'd like to see any of my other works up close. So. All right, so
yeah, we have a question that came through the chat. Do you want me to read it, Gwyneth, or can you read it?
Oh, let's see. Let me click on that actually. Flannery O'Connor famously said that one of the key ways to see more clearly and deeply as an artist is to purify the source. Would you say that you consciously purify the source in your own work by the active contemplation of beauty and the avoidance where possible of kitsch, ugliness, media supersaturation? Yeah, that is a great question. And yeah, I think basically, like, my life is a little bit chaotic because I've got 3 kids under 5. So I would love to have a lot more just like mindfulness and, all horizontal surfaces being perfectly clear. But I do try to start every day. My husband and I alternate going to daily mass. And that is, I think, really important for introducing some silence into your day, into your creative process, and humility. And frankly, a lot of, I think, growth of an artist, as I mentioned before, really closely parallels virtue. It's such a struggle. Every painting is just feels like a blow to the pride, because in your mind you think, oh, I'm going to do this great painting, and as you paint, you're like, that's not exactly how I wanted that to end up, and I think that looks a little funny. Maybe the next one will be better. But in order to finish a painting, to put it out there, and to hope to learn something more in the next one, you really do have to just offer up the fact that compared to really great artists from the past, like you're not much. So the thing that inspires me is the fact that we have an opportunity to do our best, but also to help for the next generation. And I feel quite failed actually by the previous generation, because when I went to a conventional art school, they said, oh, why do you want to learn gold leaf? Nobody does that. Or you want to learn about shadows and drapery? Go to the library. And there are so many skills that can only be learned in person, that can be transmitted from person to person. So yeah, this is getting away from what the original question was. But focusing on, yeah, I guess the supernatural motivation for why you're making something, and then also the content of a particular painting. I try to have fun and introduce a lot of bravura and fun elements, but really the end goal for sacred art is contemplation. It should be for prayer. So the painting should not be about me as the artist. It should be about the subject matter. So that's what I do try to remind myself of when I get discouraged partway through the process. I think there was another comment, another question. Javi said, so you didn't have any photographic reference for the Filipino saint? No, I did not use any photographic reference. I did, for 1 week, I did a detailed sketch, detailed drawing. And then for the second week, that was a basically 2-week project. So yeah, any other questions I can answer? Well,
I kind of want to answer a little bit of that question he has also. I kind of find that if you are part of a community, especially art community, who kind of can help you kind of see what other people are doing with their own paintings or illustrations, that you guys can bounce off ideas each other. You guys can catch not just not mistakes, but like, the kind of kitsch or the ugliness that you might have not seen yourself, but someone else who's watching you, who might be in the next room over down the hall, they kind of be like, hey, what about that idea? Or like, hey, did you notice you did this instead? And kind of like, you're helping each other out, because, you're staring at a painting yourself for 10, 30, 80 hours at a time. And sometimes having a fresh perspective really helps motivate that process further.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it can be a really hard and uncomfortable conversation to talk about kitsch specifically. I wanted to just jump in about that, because so many times there's a painting or an image that is beloved. It's, especially if it's sentimental, it's like, oh, my grandmother loved this picture, this holy card, can you make a painting of it? Like, no, I mean, I theoretically I could, but no, I can't, because it's kitsch is sentimentally flat. It just skips to something saccharine, and it does not have the depth or the dignity that is appropriate for sacred art. But a lot of times, if you say that's kitsch right there, and you point it out, that's gonna hurt someone's feelings, or they say, no, but I like it. Well, that's not a good enough argument. So oftentimes, when someone comes to me with a commission, and there might need to be a little bit of education in there too, and we have to have a conversation and say, well, I know that we oftentimes think of the saint in this way, but let's think about him in a more complex manner. Or maybe we'll depict the saint but not smiling so much, so I think kitsch is an insidious problem, because I think a lot of people are drawn to kitsch because they're reacting from a disgust with abstraction and iconoclasm. And so many times we'll see, like, the cover of some publication, it's like this abstract shape that we're like, I think that maybe that's like a dove or a person or something, but we can't tell. And so somebody, I like things that look like things, you're like, good, well, that's a good starting place, that's a good inclination, but we need to go beyond that. Instead of saying, let's react against modernism, let's say, what's the ideal, what's the greatest that we can come up with. I don't know what the future is going to look like as far as the next beautiful movement in sacred art, but I do know that it's going to be rooted in the most beautiful movements of the past. So when we look at polyphony, that was rooted in chant. And so I think when we look to the future, that art is going to be rooted in things like the Baroque or the Renaissance or the Byzantine, something like that. Did you have a question?
Oh, I think you're muted.
Oh.
All right. Yeah, sorry. And I think that's another reason why it's so helpful to paint from and to draw from the old masters, right? So that, because that I think is the best antidote for kitsch.
For just looking at them.
Yeah, it's spending time looking at them. But I think to look at them better, it's helpful to draw them and to paint them.
We were we kind of immersed ourselves in that, so it forms your eye.
Yes.
Yeah,
I have a question for you, Dr. Feingold, because I know that you often work with seminarians that maybe don't have an expansive background in art. Where do you start? When you say, first of all, this is important. Secondly, how do I give you a crash course in having good taste and an appreciation of good art? Like, how do you do it?
I used to walk around with a purse full of kitsch stuff and say,
in the refectory at
and
the
I would
seminary.
have lunch with these guys and say, see, this is kitsch.
I don't think it worked very well.
Don't put this in your church.
For the reason that you said, right? In other words, a lot of the seminarians, and this will be future pastors, right? And priests and,
Yes.
and bishops. And I mean, yes, they're attracted to the sentimental anti-modernist things that you might see uncovered, just exactly what you, and they're the people who may be commissioning, right? Paintings for churches and so on. So I think it's a really important thing that in the seminary, we do something to help to form them.
Yeah.
And it's not, I worked hard. We had a curriculum review about 7 or 8 years ago, and I was able to participate. And I worked hard to get a course, but it didn't get in, a required course on art and beauty, the philosophy and theology of art and beauty. But what I have been able to do is do some workshops. And so we did like they had, during COVID time, there was, I forget what the reason, they were there for a couple extra weeks. And so we did a crash course, just kind of going through the great masters of sacred art. Like, there's such a rich tradition. And I find the seminarians love that. And that slowly will form them. It's just similar to with sacred music, right? Again, you just need a lot, it seems to me, of exposure.
There's a story of one of our priests who went to college and he just loved the rock music and stuff. And his professor said, look, I'll exchange my classical music collection for your rap collection for 3 months. And then I'll give you back your rap or whatever it was. And he still want it. So he thought, oh, sure, that sounds like good. And so he listened to classical music for 3 months. They said, okay, I'll take my collection back. And he found he couldn't listen to it anymore. He found it awful. He found it was really bad. And he had to like throw it away because he couldn't even give it to anybody.
Yeah.
So you can form yourself in these, it's possible.
Well,
That was
one of the greatest dangers for bad sacred art or bad kitsch is in children's books. And I mean, I know you have grandchildren, I have little ones, and I think it's criminal that we sell a children short and we say, you're too little to appreciate a great work of art. I mean, yes, they'll dog-ear the pages and get their sticky fingers on your beautiful coffee table book, but children can actually appreciate Giorgione and they can appreciate Michelangelo. And so I would encourage anyone that is an influence in a child's life to introduce dignified art very young. Oh, wonderful.
Do you have this book? Do you know about this book?
No, what is it?
I think it's for children.
So looking at a
Yeah,
masterpiece.
so you just kind of go through it and she wants to just show children. I'm pretty sure it's for children.
Well, even if it's not, children can look at it because
You
So it's
just going through them and explaining the different pictures.
And so we lived in Italy for a long time. So we lived in Tuscany for 3 years when I was doing sculpture. And one of the magnificent things about Italy is you go into, so we would have lunch in this bar, right? It's really like a cafe. And I could have conversations with the barkeeper about Bernini. And, oh, what about this one and that? I mean, he knew all of Bernini's, I mean, that's incredible.
Yes.
And so in Italy, I mean, art history is a required subject in high school.
Yeah.
And so it's unfortunate that we just have no place for that, right? We might have a place for doing something, but not a place for learning about the tradition. And then the same thing happens in art school, right? You come, I mean, so I went to Washington University in the, it's 77 to 81, long time ago. And there was, I mean, just simply you do art, the doing of it is so divorced from the tradition. And so again, I applaud so much what you're doing with bringing those together.
Here's another.
Yeah. Oh, there's another.
Yeah, this is a textbook, and it just goes through and shows what, you know, great artists, what they were thinking of, what, I mean, it's just so formative. And yeah, it's a textbook.
That's perfect.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of parents doing homeschooling, so you have a freedom to put those things in, right?
Yeah.
That might not get into your, but it seems like Catholic school ought to be doing that. And I think a lot of our classical schools are.
Yeah, and I think what's kind of hard, especially right now, and having been working in the sciences and in mathematics, I would receive so much praise, like, oh, you do math, you know. It was suddenly like, I was like, yes, I do math, you know. But then when you say, well, now, you know, I do art, they're like, oh, that's nice, you know. And I was like, wait a second, art is a million times harder than just doing basic math, you know. It's like, I think math is beautiful. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's we're in a society that artificially elevates math and science to be like the pinnacle, the highest calling. And so, you know, I think for any aspiring artist, you need to say, okay, I won't succumb to what society says is the most dignified calling. Or, you know, oftentimes art is just kind of marginalized, or like, oh, that's kind of nice if you have extra time and extra money, and, you know, but no, I think it's vital. And when I was teaching art at Thomas More College, my husband and I taught a class on the way of beauty. And I really challenged the kids. I said, if you're at the market and, you know, you've got your cart of all of your food and things that you need for the week, and you have a budget, you know, can you put back some of the food that you need in order to get some flowers? You know, and no one was willing to do that, you know. And this, I asked the same question, like, if you're a pastor in a church and you need to fix the parking lot, you need air conditioning, you need a new altar, and you need, you know, a new bathroom, something like that. Every single time it was the air conditioning that was first, and fixing the bathroom. All of these were paramount before you ever got around to having a beautiful altar. So changing our own sense of hierarchy of what's truly important, and also realizing that for beauty, like, suffering is necessary, sacrifice is necessary, and, you know, sacrificing your time or sacrificing your money, or just sacrificing what's easy, like you were saying with rock music. You know, it's harder work to listen to classical music, but it's worth that sacrifice.
Any other thoughts or comments for Gwyneth?
Let's see, I think Javi, is that how you say that?
Yes, Javi. I just wanted to congratulate you because you are giving us not only art lessons but life lessons, and that's very, very, very important, and very. Gosh, I don't know how to express myself because I'm speaking in another language, but I hope you can understand.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me and joining me today. I really was so excited to have this event because, you know, so often, you know, you don't get to have these conversations. And
Absolutely.
you know, oftentimes being, you know, an artist, you're somewhat isolated, and even doing things like marketing or social media where you kind of have to present your work out there, it feels one-sided. And I always wonder who's out there on the other side, and what are they thinking, and what direction are things going in. But I have to say, I feel so much hope. There have been just so many people that I have crossed paths with increasingly throughout time. And I think, you know, it's a wonderful silver lining to everything with COVID. I think people have a great yearning for connection, for hope, for beauty, for something lasting, and something real. And that's what I encourage everyone, you know, just as a takeaway from our talk today, to try to challenge yourself to like take a few minutes that you would have spent online or doing something digital, and put the phone away and just sit down and look at a beautiful work of art, listen to a beautiful piece of music, do some gardening. It's transformative, and I think it makes us happier and more joyful people too.
Thank you so much, Gwyneth. I think that should be the period on the end of the sentence. I shouldn't say much more than that. But thank you so much for your time. We've so, at least I have so enjoyed this. And it's been so incredible to see your work, which we originally found on Twitter. So even though maybe photography and social media isn't the best, it was a medium, a vehicle to which have this event. So
absolutely. Well, happy feast day to everyone, and go read G.K. Chesterton's Lepanto tonight. So it's my recommendation for the evening, for your work of beauty to inspire you. So, all right, goodbye, and thank you so much.
bye everyone. Have a great evening.
Bye. Thank you very much.